Contracting process. So this goes into, what does it take to actually buy the product, and how can you do it, and what are the different alternative ways of buying energy. I'll start from the longest term and then go down to the shortest term. That if you what we call, and these are the sort of definitions that are used in the industry, and they're not hard and fast, and they tend to change, and so there's some grey area between them. But long term is probably over 10 years. And one of the things about that is that if you're building one of these projects and you need to support the financing of the project with the contract, you generally need 10 years plus to support that financing. So very often these are related to new developments, and a certain proportion of the offtake will need to be committed to these sorts of contracts in order to get the project through the final investment decision and move forward. So they're generally pretty big, sort of 200-page type of contracts, very complex, and they take a long time to negotiate. A variation of that is what's called long-term tolling, and these are really relate to the US, where they're there for the same reason, though, to support the financing of those new US projects. So again, a long-term commitment. You then have something called medium-term, 2 to 10 years. Similar contract structure, just not as long a commitment as the long-term contracts. You have something called strips, which are they're not individual cargoes, they're literally strips of cargoes with a number of 2 to might be 12 or even more than that cargoes that are specified distance apart. So that gives you a strip of cargo. So you buy that strip. And one of the differences, you buy them under a different contracting arrangement, under something called a master agreement, which I'll talk about here in a second. The long-term contracts are generally very bespoke. They're specialist, and they're amended to suit the particular project and customer that they're being used for. So they're customized, I suppose, is the way of saying it. Whereas these, under master agreement, is a much simpler sort of contracting arrangement. And then you finally have spot, just buying a single cargo. Generally you buy it about 90 days out, something like that, 80, 90 days. And then you again do it under a master agreement. I'll talk about. How do you actually progress deals? Very often sort of announcements in the press about somebody's done this with this counterparty, and it always tells when they say what the name of the agreement is, it generally tells you how real that is. But starting from the sort of point of least real to most real is that sort of list of agreements. So starting from the memorandum of understanding. Generally that, and all these agreements are important, but it generally says at a high level what you plan to do without much in the way of commitment. Confidentiality agreement is the next step. Sometimes that comes first. You then get a range of non-binding agreements, whether you call it key terms, letter of intent, heads of agreement. They're almost interchangeable, in fact, but these are more substantive commitments that you make, and they'll have binding elements to them, especially around things like confidentiality in a number of areas. But they won't be the final agreement. That's this down here, is when you get to sale and purchase agreement, you then have a binding commitment between the parties. Very often with conditions precedent, but you do have a binding agreement. Now you don't go through all these steps. What you will generally do, you almost always do this one, confidentiality agreement, and then you'll do one of the non-binding ones, and then you do this final one. So there are a number of ways you can go through this process. one of the debates within the industry is, is the industry moving away from long-term contracts and towards just short-term deals, spot. The oil market does not really have long-term contracts. There are some long-term arrangements that generally everything is sold on spot indexes. And LNG is very different to that. So one of the debates is LNG going to progress to that? Probably the thought 5-10 years ago was, it's moving in that direction. And while that is happening to some extent, I think there are some structural issues that make it difficult for it to go all the way through to a true spot market. And I'll talk about what they are. But this is an example of the contract durations, running through from the year 2000 through to 2024, 5, 6. And you can see there's been these very long-term contracts, 25 years, 20 years, 15 years. There's still a very substantial amount of volume that goes through these long-term contracts. So it's not going hell for leather towards a spot market type arrangement. And I think what's happened since less COVID, but certainly the Ukraine situation is only going to cement that, because there have been significant problems in the spot market since Ukraine. But there'll continue to be a mix, I think, is the reality. What's the average durations? This is going from 2015 up to 2023 at the top. You see the duration is actually getting longer as time has gone on. And one of the reasons for this is to underpin these capital investments. It takes getting one of these multi-billion-dollar projects off the ground from a financing perspective needs a lot of support from things like offtake arrangements. And that isn't going to change anytime soon. So certainly since COVID, they've continued to increase. This is a little bit out of date actually now. It's 2021, 2022. But where have the contracts actually been signed? You can see 2021, China was very big, as they were in 2022. They've actually done a little bit less in 2023. But you can see another big part of this circle is these what we call portfolio players. So that's these companies that are buying the LNG on sale. So it's a kind of trading arrangement that an optimization play that they have. So they're saying the original LNG industry was very much a point-to-point. So it was project to customer. And you now have this sort of group in the middle optimizing as the industry has got bigger. There's just some color. These are the long-term ones. They're usually very long negotiations. They can be. You can actually do a long-term contract you could do it in a month if you were motivated to close it. But generally, they take multiple months. Pretty much everything's negotiable, regardless of what the counterparty says. There are sort of pro forma documents available for these types of agreements, but you need significant legal support and commercial support to do one of these, especially given the length of the commitment and so on. So that's just an example of one particular deal. They tend to have a lot of people involved, but they do have a consistent structure generally, in terms of the sections. They usually have a big celebration at the end. So those are Tokyo Gas and Tokyo Electric. The other way of, if you don't do a long-term sale purchase agreement, the other way of doing is something called a master agreement. So that's where you negotiate all the terms and conditions between a counterparty, and you have at the back of it, you basically have a fill in the blanks, something called a confirmation notice. So basically, when you actually want to do a deal, you just fill in the blanks: price, volume, delivery date, all that sort of stuff, and then you sign that, and all the terms that you previously negotiated apply to that. So it's a way to allow you to literally do a deal over the phone or on email without any delay. Now, that's very good. You know, one of the problems with that is that if you're a seller or a buyer, you need to negotiate all these master agreements with all these counterparties. Chevron, I think we have 140 of them. And if you don't have those, you limit the number of counterparties you can potentially deal with. So the obvious solution to that is, you know, can't we get an industry standard one out there that we can all then use? And there have been a number of efforts to do that, and that's an example of one of those. That's the BP one that you can download from the link, and you know, BP will deal on that without any amendments, which I think is a good initiative. It's really a barrier to entry otherwise. That if you're, you know, for instance, a new importer into the Philippines, if you don't have a range of these agreements and you're trying to buy spot cargo, that can be problematic because you may say you've only got 10 of them, you could restrict yourself to only 10 suppliers. Another way of buying is by tender. And this is, the previous two are obviously bilateral negotiations, and we were just negotiating with the counterpart. Many entities have tried to do this, you know, especially if you're in a situation where you have a government, the government is involved in the process somehow. You know, there are often, you know, issues around probity and process, and you know, can have, you know, requirements to tender everything. And in those sort of situations, these can be more popular. They tend to be quite difficult though. One of the problems is that the deals all tend to have so many unusual elements, and there are lots of things that need to be negotiated. That putting a tender document out there that is going to be, which is going to allow you to just get the responses back in and rank them from, you know, top to bottom, and then just choose the top. That tends not to work because the deals are quite complicated. So these can often be used to shortlist that you may tender and then shortlist 3 or something like that, and then go into bilateral negotiations. But they are still used. They work best if it's a buyer's market, as you were. If there's plenty of LNG around, then you're likely to get engagement from the sellers more than if it's the other way around. Actually, I think that's the end of the pricing piece. Oh, sorry, the contracting piece. So happy to take any questions if there are any.
We are opening the floor for questions on LNG contracting process.
That's quite a dry topic, I must admit. Going through contracting.
At this point in time, the long-term contract is still usually subscribed to take or pay. Right? Just a take or pay. Yeah. For the MP, is it required for you to be exclusive with the trader to have an MP, or you can sign up MP for different traders?
No, the latter. You sign up.
So you could choose. Yeah. Still you could choose. Right?
Yeah, you can sign up 100, and then you can deal with everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, you'd never go.
But for long term, you have to subscribe to the take or pay, right?
Yeah. Generally, take away 100%. But there is flexibility in the contract to put the volume up and down.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the main difference.
Yeah. They're just different MAs are generally, I think the longest we use an MA for 4 years, I think. Whereas we did 30-year long-term contracts.